Dick Covey is walking down the hall and said, "Come on, let's go over and look at the film." And on the way over, he says, "I'm really sorry." He said, "Bob," he said, "that damn tropical ocean was just flat as a board. There was nothing there. Not anything. And clouds around, but no eddies, no nothing, no waves, no nothing." And so we go in, we're up in the photo lab, and Houck was there and others, and we were looking at the film, and I'm cranking some film over, and we had 3 viewing tables. And I'm looking along, and I'm looking at the equatorial area, and here are these long lines going through the ocean, and there we saw solitons. We later learned that there are Suloys. Suloys are chaotic wave lines, where 2 masses of water will come together and the waves are being blown, but the water on one side is going this way and the other side is going that way, and the waves come here at that point, and the waves just crash together. You can see little ones out here in Galveston Bay or even in Clear Lake. But in the ocean, they can get pretty big. They can get so big that in the old days, sailing vessels couldn't get through them. And we'd known that they existed, and we knew they existed in bays where tides would come in and there'd be this thing in the front. And the Soviets call them the Suloy. We call them chaotic wave lines, but we call them Suloys after we learned what they were doing. And so, I looked at those things and I said, what is that, And so I got the list of the nadir points, and I saw that line was right along where the boundary between the equatorial current was going west and the countercurrent was going east. And so it was clearly a converging boundary, and so that had to be a Suloy. And so I yelled at Dick, "Come over here and look at this." I said, "Here's the tropical Pacific, and you were taking these photos." And he says, "Yeah, look how flat that is. There's just the wind streaks." And I said, "Yeah, but what's that?" And he says, "God, I never saw that." Well, they were all over. And it was the first evidence that we had that there were these long converging wave lines showing a convergence in the ocean, that there were these long things in the open ocean. And so then Paul and I began to go back through oceanographic data to see if we could ever find any subsurface information about them, because they're not very wide. I mean, you look at the photograph and it looks like some guy had a hoe and dug a trench in the ocean. Well, they're really wider than that. They may be 100 meters wide or something like that, but from space they don't look that wide. And so Paul finally found, he said, "I remember, this research cruise I was on down in the Coral Sea, and we found something like that, but it was at nighttime," and he said, "I was out on deck, but the guys took a lot of data, so let me see if I can find the data." Well, sure enough, what's happened is when those things come together, they actually form a bunch of very tight internal waves that go down to as deep as 500 meters. Well, what a hell of an acoustic discontinuity that's got to be. Then we dredged out some papers from Japan. They call them somies. And they determined that they gave off a hissing sound underwater. Listening to them, they gave off a very high frequency sound that sounded like bacon frying, hissing. And so when we checked into the frequency, it was exactly the frequency that the new fancy Mark 45 torpedo that will go 40 or 50 miles and has its search sonar on its nose, so when it gets going and it's a fire-by-wire thing, it gets out far enough and you kind of head it towards where you think the other guy is, then it can pick up the noise from the ship or the other submarine and home in on it. But if you're firing through a Suloy, it ain't going to make it because there's the sound and it's going to explode on contact. And so, you know, suddenly this opened up a whole new can of worms because, you know, these torpedoes were highly classified. You know, I didn't know much about them. Paul did, but I didn't. And he said, by God, that's it. And then he went back home to his lab and told these guys all about it. And then this accounted for a lot of premature firings that nobody could explain. So then the question was, where are they? I mean, where are they in the ocean? Well, you know, once the astronauts saw these things that Dick Covey had photographed, well then other guys say, you know, I saw something like that out in Hawaii, you know, or I saw something, you know, and so we begin to get more and more information about Suloys. Well, you know, those kinds of things then begin to pop up all around the ocean. And, of course, once the threat of the Soviet Union went away, they still became important because they then permitted us to be able to determine boundaries of water motion. I mean, we knew water motion from the spiral eddies. We knew that kind of motion. But how do we detect where the actual boundary is between equatorial and countercurrents, or are there boundaries along the edge of the Gulf Stream? Yes, there are, you know, but we didn't know that until we began to see this. So again, it was a serendipity sort of thing because, you know, Dick Covey never saw them. But after that, you know, the boys and girls, the astronauts would see them.